We're now 7 practices into the Seahawks training camp. Who's hot and who's not? It's time for our first stock watch of the 2024 season coming up next here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here on our Wednesday episode by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s that are listening in, whether you are in nearby Sumner, Washington, or overseas in London, England. We greatly appreciate each and every one of you for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. Not much going on at the VMAC today. The Seahawks did have a training camp practice, but it was all walkthroughs. They took their foot off the pedal for a day to let guys rest up a little bit. No major updates coming out from that practice, unfortunately. But with that being said, we now have 7 practices in the books. We're going to have our first stock watch, who's hot, who's not, as we get closer to the first preseason game. Connor and I are going to play a little bit of what we know about the 2024 Seahawks after 1 week's worth of practices. And the great Jake Bobo will be stopping by, and we'll be chatting with him for a short interview from the VMAC at training camp. This episode is brought your way by GameTime. Download the GameTime app, create an account, and use the code LOCKEDONNFL for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Now for your lead story here on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. It might be hard to believe, but we are already 7 training camp practices into the new season. We've had a couple padded practices, not a lot of exciting things happening on the practice field today, with Seattle taking a walkthrough practice, half speed, really working on the mental aspect of the game. Not a lot of things you can report from a practice like that, but still, we've got a week's worth of practices, Connor, which means it's time for our first stock watch of the 2024 season. Which players are hot, which players are not. It could be about making the roster. It could be guys who are going to be on the team, but maybe aren't necessarily getting a lot of reps on the first team defense or offense. There's a lot of different curriculum with this, but who's the first player that jumps out for you as far as who's hot, the player that's really boosted their stock here in this first week of training camp practices?
Yeah, I'm going to start on the defensive side of the ball, Corbin, with Derek Hall particularly. There's been a lot of talk about him just looking really good so far. He's looking stronger. Obviously, the guy does not skip leg day. His legs are massive. He's a big dude. Underwhelming rookie season, but so far in training camp, he's just been looking like he's going to make that second-year leap. Didn't have any sacks last year, but he played more run defense snaps than he did pass rush snaps, which is interesting. And in terms of Seattle's edge rusher group, we don't have a lot of guys who can really defend the run well. Uchenna Nwosu is obviously one who is going to set that edge regularly, but we need a secondary guy. Seattle needs a secondary guy who they can trust to stop the run. And Derek Hall, if he's able to make a big difference, obviously Nwosu was talking about him yesterday after padded practice, just stating that Derek Hall, and I quote, looks hungry to get better. And overall, just in stopping the run, he's been improved. It's early still. We can't put too much stock in it, but overall, Derek Hall looks like he's going to be potentially making a leap in year 2.
And for those of you that are listening to the show, I apologize if either one of us cuts out a little bit. I am on the road for training camp at my hotel. The internet works well most of the time, but have limited control on that. So we apologize if that happens. But my first player who's hot, who's on the uptick, is Derek Young. And it's not a player that we have talked about a lot here in the first week, but I can tell you that those that have been at training camp, it's really nice to see number 83 back healthy, because he was really hampered all of last season. He had the sports hernia injury in training camp last year, and then he was on injured reserve for a while. When he came back, just didn't look like he was still right. Only really played in 3 games last year after a promising rookie season. You are seeing that 6'2", 225-pound athlete at work on the field. Had a couple of really nice catches in Tuesday's practice. You're seeing him stand out every practice. And of course, he's a really good special teams player. So somebody that isn't getting a lot of buzz, but it just feel like at this point, Derek Young's got a lot of things working in his favor to make this football team. And I think the other thing that helps him, we know how much Ryan Grubb likes to move pieces around on offense. Derek Young's played some fullback previously. He can play in the slot. He can play outside. He was a running back in college. Ryan Grubb's going to love a guy like that he can move all over the formation. So Derek Young, to me, is a player who has definitely put himself back on the radar for making this football team. On the defensive side of the ball, talked about him some in yesterday's show. Artie Burns, he just doesn't go away. He's a player who has kind of been cast aside in training camp the last couple of years, and he comes out and he plays at a high level. He gets a bunch of pass breakups. He gets interceptions. He plays now at a high level in the slot. He does it with the first team defense. They want to play Devin Witherspoon on the outside. There's a lot of reasons to be excited about what Artie Burns is doing. The coaching staff seems to be very high on him. He's made some big leaps since the spring in this defensive scheme. Seems like he's a heady player that's pretty intelligent as well. Those are things that Mike McDonald is looking for. So he was a player that wasn't even in my first 5 players out when we started training camp. And right now, I think he's got a good chance to make this football team. So you don't talk about somebody that's raised their stock. Artie Burns just stays on the radar and continues to exceed expectations.
Yeah, he's somebody people almost forgot about just because of the situation we have at cornerback, how deep they are. For my second stock-up player is going to be Jake Bobo. Obviously, everybody saw the catch that he made. You saw it with your own two eyes live, Corbin. Incredible catch, Superman-like catch. The way he was able to lay out. There's no knock on Sam Howell for slightly overthrowing that ball. All it did was give Bobo an opportunity to stand out. Bobo's going to make this football team regardless. That's not a question at this point. He's most likely going to be one of the 6 receivers that makes this team. He can do everything. He's not an exceptional athlete. We know that. Even if you watch that catch, it's not like he was streaking down the field. He really is somebody who's just very sound in his mechanics. He can block well. He's going to be a plug-and-play player on this offense, regardless of whatever his role is, whether that's receiving or primarily being an outside blocker in run plays. We don't know entirely what it's going to look like yet, but all we know is that Jake Bobo's making plays in training camp, and that's impressing Mike McDonald in his first year as a Seahawks coach.
On the flip side, there's got to be some players. If there's other ones that are elevating their stock, there's got to be some players who are on the opposite end of the spectrum. And on the offensive line, it's interesting because I'm not sitting here saying that Stone Forsythe isn't going to make this roster, because he did play fairly well when he was called upon last year, and he started 8 games. But there are some things that are starting to work against him. I feel like he has struggled early on, especially the 2 padded practices, looked really rough in the one-on-one periods, has been beaten several times during the team drills. He's been getting work with the 3rd team offense at times, dating back to OTAs. And I think the other thing that's now working against him, and we talked about this on yesterday's show, maybe the biggest surprise for me, and we'll see what he ends up doing as camp progresses, but Mike Jarrell has been really impressive early on. In the first 2 padded practices, looked really good. 1 head-to-head matchups with both Boye Mafe and Derek Hall. Darrell Taylor has not gone against him, but we've seen the young player really rise to the occasion these first couple of days. He's going to have his rookie bumps. He's a 6th rounder coming from a Division II school, but the fact that he's playing well, McClendon Curtis has played great since the beginning of the offseason program. There's still optimism in the building that Abraham Lucas is going to be able to get back here soon and be ready for week 1. If Lucas gets back and you've got Curtis and Jarrell and you've got George Fant, you've got Charles Cross, I mean, where does Stone Forsythe fit into that? So I just, at this point, there's some skepticism for me at this point that he is on this roster when the season starts, because he just hasn't played very well here to start things off. And his new competition has really upped the ante on it.
Yeah, and I'm going back to the defensive side for stock down in this regard. It's Mike Jackson. And you know this pains me to say it, Corbin. I'm a big fan of Mike Jackson, but the slot position is going to be a little bit more versatile this year, as you've already stated. Devin Witherspoon might be playing outside a little bit more. They're toying around with that right now in camp. Trey Brown has been making a lot of plays. He's been standing out, particularly from Mike Jackson. And I was of the impression that Mike Jackson was going to be perfect for this defense just because he is a hard-nosed, willing run defender who I thought Mike McDonald would take to well and really kind of favor him. And that's not to say he isn't to this point. It's just that these other corners, some of which have been slightly forgotten about, like Artie Burns in particular, are now rising. And we're just not hearing Mike Jackson's name quite as much. So I heard he took second-team reps yesterday in the padded practice, along with Trey Brown, just while they were moving around the cornerbacks. So it pains me to say it, but Mike Jackson right now, his stock is down. I want him to make the team, but who knows?
Yeah, I think he makes this football team, but I think from a stock standpoint, in terms of where he fits depth chart wise, he hasn't been able to claw up into that first team defense yet. Now, maybe he will get his opportunity. Again, Artie Burns wasn't on the radar, and then he was playing with the ones in the slot on Tuesday. So maybe Mike Jackson's got that opportunity coming his way to try to get back into this competition. Who knows? Real quick, D. Eskridge. I don't think Eskridge has played poorly necessarily the first 7 practices. The problem is I thought he needed to get off to a fast start to make this football team, and he has not. And he's playing a lot of snaps with the third-team offense. Those are not good ingredients if you're a on-the-bubble player that's trying to make a roster. There haven't been splash plays. There haven't been any really good practices from him. So a guy that's got a new coaching staff that was trying to turn the corner, I have not seen that yet. And maybe kick returns gets him onto the roster, but it feels like that alone is not going to be enough. A player like Derek Young or Laviska Shenault is going to offer more than D. Eskridge at this point. So former second-round pick, the Seahawks were holding out hope maybe he would rise to the occasion. So far, though, he has not. When we come back, we are going to continue our first week of training camp review. What do we think we know about the 2024 Seahawks at this stage of training camp? We're going to get that here in a moment on our Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much. I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games, and the sports aren't sportsing like we want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app and dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. Right now, new customers get $200 in bonus bets guaranteed. That's $200, win or lose. Who will lead the U.S. men's basketball team in scoring? Is Jason Tatum actually going to get off the bench for the next game? Does Byron Murphy II have a strong shot at winning Defensive Rookie of the Year for the Seahawks? Can Aaron Judge get to 60 home runs again for the Yankees and make some history? You can bet on it all on an app that is safe, secure, and easy to use. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com and add a big win to your summer bucket list today. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Welcome back to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi, and a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in, and thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. The Seahawks now have 7 training camp practices in the books today. Not quite as exciting of a practice, with it being a walkthrough format, no pads, no helmets, and some really odd practice t-shirts. It wasn't jerseys today. It was just a different day at the VMAC. But that being said, we are now 7 practices in. That gives you a little bit of a litmus test with what this Seahawks team could be. And so transitioning from individual players, let's get to one of my favorite things to do at this stage of training camp, what we think we know about the 2024 Seattle Seahawks. And Connor, I'm going to give you the mic first here. What do you think you know at this stage about the 2024 Seattle Seahawks?
Well, Corbin, number one is there's going to be no drama at the wide receiver position. Whenever roster cuts need to be made at the end of the preseason, there's not going to be much drama. It's going to be DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, Jake Bobo, Jackson Smith-Njigba, Laviska Shenault, and probably Derek Young. That's probably where it's going to shake out. A lot of the other guys, we saw them in the offseason. They looked pretty good. But as training camp's gone on, they're just not making the plays. They're not getting to where they are standing out enough to be on the 53-man roster at the end of the preseason. Practice squad is a different thing. Obviously, there's going to be some practice squad slots open for those guys. But in terms of who's making the roster, it's a deep receiver group, and it's not going to be shaken up as far as we know right now.
Yeah, I think the general consensus out there has been that this receiving core, as deep as it is, that there's going to be a major competition for the last couple spots. And I would agree with you at this point from being on the practice field and seeing how things are playing out. There's some other guys who have made some plays, but they can be slipped onto the practice squad. It's a position that you can get some pretty good players there. You don't have to worry about being stolen by other teams. Derek Young is somebody that I do think if he hit the market, other teams would be interested just because of his size, athleticism, and special teams ability. So I think that's why he's on this roster. What I think I know about the Seahawks in 2024, there are plenty of questions about the offensive line, but this is going to be a more physical group than the one that we saw the last couple of years. Not even just last year, the last couple of years. So that's something I think I know at this stage. And the reason I'm saying that, Olu Oluwatimi is a more physical player than Evan Brown is. That's already evident. If Christian Haynes gets into the lineup at right guard, if he doesn't, I mean, Anthony Bradford has been pushing some people around here first couple of padded practices, but Haynes has brought some nastiness. Laken Tomlinson's bringing in some nastiness. Even Charles Cross looks like he's kind of had those guys rub off on him with some of the run blocks that he had in Tuesday's practice, and he is getting after it with physicality. So there may still very well be questions with that offensive line, but one thing that I don't think is going to be questioned is the physicality of this group, which you and I would both probably agree with this. If the Seahawks are more physical up front with their offensive line, there is going to be a positive ripple effect for the run game and the passing game for an offense that has the pieces at the skill positions to be top 10 in scoring this year.
Yeah, physicality just has a ripple effect on a football team in general. It really is just, are you going to out-physical the guy across from you? And that's particularly important in the trenches in terms of what our offensive line has been these past few years. It just hasn't been physical enough. There has not been enough victories at the point of attack, especially in the run game, to be able to create those lanes for Ken Walker and now Zach Charbonnet for the last season and going into this year. So that's going to be a much improved area, and I'm glad you feel that way because I think a lot of other people are hoping to see that as well. Another thing that I think that I know about this team is that the secondary as a whole is going to be improved. And I think that that's purely just because of the depth at corner. There's so much more versatility in terms of the rookies that were brought in, the Auburn rookies and DJ James, Nehemiah Pritchett. That depth is going to be huge. The same stuff we talked about earlier. If Artie Burns can carve out a role in the nickel, that's going to be massive just in terms of being able to move guys in and out. Kayvon Wallace was a guy I almost put in and stock up just because we've been hearing about him and the plays he's making. He picked off Sam Howell a couple days ago. This group has so much versatility. If they're going to run 3 safeties, that's a possibility. They could run potentially 4 safeties if they need to. They can run just an incredible amount of defensive backs, alleviate some pressure in the passing game on that front 7. That's something I'm pretty sure about with the Seahawks team so far.
Yeah, we're in agreement on that one. I think that there's maybe a situation, at least cost-wise, that less is more for the Seahawks at safety because they've got some really good flexible pieces that are going to fit in there. Speaking of that secondary, for my last one, I'm going to move away from the big picture, from talking in generalities or position groups. What I think I know about the Seahawks in 2024, Reek Woolen is back, baby. That's what I know. Reek Woolen looks like the all-pro caliber player that we saw a couple years ago as a rookie. He's playing with more confidence. He's healthy, which I don't think any of us realized just how much that was hindering him last year. Dealing with a couple of injuries, especially as a tackler, it made it very difficult for him. He's healthy. He's playing with an intensity that I've never seen him play with. Him and DK Metcalf going against each other has been get your popcorn ready television here in the first 7 training camp practices. And I love it that we're seeing him rise to the occasion, the sharpening iron idea that Mike McDonald was talking about. So not only is Reek Woolen playing like the rookie that we saw a couple years ago, I think he's playing at another level right now because some of the things we questioned, the physicality, I'm seeing a guy that's willing to go mix it up. I'm seeing a player that's getting his hands on the football regularly. He's not backing down from any of Seattle's receivers, and he's playing with great confidence. Mike McDonald, maybe he's got a superstar in the wings there. If they can get Reek Woolen playing the way that we know he's capable of. And one thing I think I know at this point, Connor, is that Riq Woolen's got a really good chance to have a big season for the Seahawks.
And that was one of the biggest question marks coming into this year, right? Is will Riq Woolen be an improved tackler? And I think that the shoulder injury had a huge effect on his ability and just willingness to tackle last year. And I think we're seeing that he's gotten healthier, which is probably making him a little more confident in his ability and his willingness to come up and make tackles and to thump receivers. We've seen it in the scuffles. He's already getting into it with DK Metcalf, like you mentioned, Corbin. That's what fans want to see. They want to see Riq Woolen showing that he is a physical corner and somebody that is going to come up and play both in the run game, and then he's also going to be able to thump guys when they come across the middle on crossing routes or whatever it might be. That was one of the big questions. And if Riq Woolen can answer that, as he has so far in training camp, and carry that into the regular season, he's going to be back on the rise that I think a lot of people want him to be on.
All right, for my final one here, as far as what I think I know about the 2024 Seahawks, real quick, I think several draft picks from the last couple years could be on the hot seat. And I already mentioned one, actually two of them in the last segment. I guess it's been 4 years since Stone Forsythe and D. Eskridge were drafted by the Seahawks. But if you look at, for example, the 2022 draft class, there's some players from that group that was so heralded. I still think Kobe Bryant has got a little bit of an uphill climb. The fact that he's receiving praise from the coaching staff suggests to me that he is making this football team. But at the same time, there is that ton of depth that's back there. And the safety position, there's no guarantee that he's making this football team. And Mike Morris, hey, I think he's on this football team, but if he misses time with a elbow injury, Miles Adams is off to a really good start. And to me, that's a player that isn't necessarily all the way in on this roster either. So that's a 2023 pick. But there are a lot of guys that made this football team a year ago from those last 2 or 3 draft classes that, hey, this coaching staff didn't draft those players. So I feel like without having that allegiance there could be some cuts that maybe surprise some people from those couple of draft classes. And there's pressure now on some of these players because the pads are coming back on tomorrow. You better start elevating your game, or else some of these newcomers are going to end up taking your roster spot.
Yeah, that's a great point. The allegiance is a big thing. This coaching staff doesn't have the same plan for these players that Pete Carroll and his staff had when they drafted them and were slowly trying to develop them, right? I mean, obviously, D. Eskridge is the big one. D. Eskridge has had his chances. If he can't shape up real quick, he's not going to be on this football team. Mike Morris is a very intriguing one because I agree with you, Corbin. I think he is on this football team. I think he offers enough versatility that he fits somewhere in that defensive front. And if he doesn't make the roster, he's definitely a practice squad guy without a doubt. But yeah, I think that the allegiance is a huge thing when it comes to this. And there's not going to be much place for a lot of these guys to make a swing in terms of how much playing time they're going to get, particularly because most of the holes that opened up over the offseason were plugged with free agents. You look at the safety position in particular, they cut Jamal Adams and Quandre Diggs. They fill those with free agents, and that happened at other positions as well. So it's not like it was a next man up kind of a thing. They went and actually tried to fill those holes with free agents rather than just elevating those guys who have been around for a couple of years.
When we come back, we are going to switch gears with our latest training camp interview. And I know Connor's looking forward to this. We get to talk more about more Bobo here. When we come back, and you'll have Jake Bobo chatting with him for a few moments from the VMAC during training camp. Don't go away. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends at GameTime. You shouldn't have to skip a mortgage payment when you buy tickets to your next big event. GameTime is a fast and easy way to buy tickets for all the sports, music, comedy, and theater near you. With killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seat, and their best price guarantee, GameTime takes the guesswork out of buying tickets. Back in May, my wife and I got some awesome seats to see Judas Priest in St. Louis, Rob Halford and company, $75 a ticket. And we got to see the iconic band up close and personal without breaking the bank. If you thought I was going to skip out on that good of a deal, you've got another thing coming. GameTime has deals on the tickets right at the day of the event, and the GameTime guarantee means you'll always get the best price to write your own memories. If you find tickets in the same section and row for less, GameTime will credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with GameTime by downloading the GameTime app. Create an account and use the code LOCKEDON for $20 off your first purchase. Again, create an account and redeem the code LOCKEDON for $20 off. Download GameTime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price, guaranteed. You're listening to the Wednesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined for today's show by my co-host, Connor Benintendi. And a special thanks to all the 12s who are listening in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. If you're tired of all the screaming on ESPN or Fox Sports or any other major networks, give Locked On Sports Today a shot. Locked On Sports Today provides you all the breaking news, insight, and breaking developments on your favorite teams without all the screaming. So make sure to check out Locked On Sports Today. That's on YouTube and wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure that you get all the insight that you need on your favorite teams. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Jake Bobo has been one of the coolest stories for the Seahawks the last couple of years. I mean, he's got a fan in Field Yates of ESPN that bought his jersey. He has... I'm just saying this from being at practice the other day. I mean, DK Metcalf is incredibly popular, but when Jake Bobo was running up and down the sidelines during practice, you would have thought Jake Bobo was the receiver making $27 million a year with the way that the fans, the kids in particular, it was Kids Day on Tuesday, the way that the kids were cheering on Jake Bobo, you would have thought Jake Bobo was a $27 million receiver. He has become incredibly popular in Seattle, had a productive rookie season as an undrafted free agent. And now, Connor, as you were talking about earlier, we're getting to see this guy play the role of Superman in practice and make top 5 catches ever at the VMAC on the practice field. It seems like whatever people were expecting for year 2, there were some people that thought, I don't know if he can replicate what he did last year. Not only is he replicating it, he has taken a big step forward. And I think you and I would agree, he's already very much on this football team going into 2024.
Yeah, you have to see what you have in Jake Bobo. This is not a guy that you can just say, oh, he doesn't have the athletic testing, he doesn't have the measurables, whatever it might be, so, oh, he's not an NFL player. No, Jake Bobo is the guy. He's made these plays both and this is not isolated to training camp. This has happened in the regular season. We've seen him make toe-tapping touchdowns in the regular season. This is something that is proven. And now he's doing it in training camp. He's just solidifying himself as a fan favorite player that you have to leave him on the team for a couple years. See what you have in this guy. Who knows? He could be an all-pro in the making who runs like a 4.7, 4. I don't even know what his 40 time is, but I know it's not fast. So that's the biggest thing. But overall, this guy's just, I'm not going to call him a superstar because that would be way over the top, but you have to wait and see what Bobo's going to become.
And the best thing about this for fans is you get to see more Bobo here on Locked On Seahawks. Now, I had to interview Jake with a few other reporters, and out of respect for them, I'm not going to put some of the questions that they asked up, but you're going to have a chance here in this quick interview to see some of the questions I asked Jake, and I can promise you that there's a few good laughs that you're going to get from this interview as well, which seems to be a prerequisite with any time that you talk to Jake Bobo. So take a listen. Did your offseason approach stay the same as it was last year, or after your rookie season, did you make some modifications now that you know what to expect?
I think a little bit. I think, baseline, you got to keep everything the same. I've kind of been doing the same thing, since I started playing college ball, which is in the offseason, hit the weight room, get a physical edge, and then work on some position-specific stuff on the side. But for me, it's just figuring out, number one, how can I be impactful in this offense, and what do I need to do in the last 2-3 months before we get back here to have an impact on that.
What's the relationship with Grubb off the field? I know that you didn't play for him in college, but you had arguably your best game ever against Washington, and I know he unprompted name-dropped you in the first press conference, so I don't know if that was something that was ever brought up when you first met with him.
No, I had to ask him if he burned all that ugly purple. That was the first thing I said. The first couple things I said to him. But he's a great guy. He's a player's coach. He's coming to us ask him what we see, what we do here. But obviously we know and he knows that he's confident in his systems, his scheme. You can see it out there. The offense has had a great first couple days of camp. We're bought in. I don't think you can say enough about Coach G and what he's done coming in.
Gino was saying yesterday, talking with us, he was saying that you were the receiver that he was leaning on as far as getting this new offense down. Is there some carryover, though, playing for Chip Kelly with some of the stuff that you have in this offense?
Yeah, I think Coach Chip's offense in general helped me a ton even last year because NFL offenses are just so much different. And it's almost like I'm going back into more of a college-based scheme this year, which is great. I've played in that all 5 years of college. But yeah, helping G, or not helping G helping the receivers, me helping the receivers. A lot of guys are starting to pick it up a little bit quicker than we did in OTAs. But it's been good, and we'll keep going, move forward.
Jake, how much playing against this defense of Mike McDonald's, how much is that going to help you guys acclimating to Grubb's offense when you're playing against that every single day?
Because they'll combat what I just said about coming up to the line with multiple calls. They'll have multiple calls, so we'll shift. They'll shift. They're giving us something, we shift, and then they spin to a totally different defense. So it's almost like prepare to be unprepared with this defense. You got to react on the snap. You got to know your job. What route I'm running, coverage recognition, route scheme, and then if they spin to a whole different defense, okay, how does my route change? How does my block change? How does my leverage change? So it's huge for us to be able to go through that now, so that when we face some of that in the fall, we'll be ready to go.
I wonder if he got Ryan Grubb to take to his question about burning his purple stuff, Connor.
I doubt it. I truly doubt it.
I really enjoyed having a chance to talk with Jake Bobo. He's so much fun, and I will say this, and coming off that great season that he had last year, the unexpected greatness of Jake Bobo. As he mentioned in one of his answers with one of the other reporters, he's more comfortable this year because he knows the building, he knows and some of the coaches, he knows his teammates, but at the same time, he is not changing as approaching things. He's still sweating it out. Am I on this roster? And I think that's one of the ingredients for his success. So just a guy that's a lot of fun to watch, the way he carries himself, works hard, incredibly intelligent. And I can also tell you he is not only popular with fans, he is very popular with his teammates. And there is one man on this team, if Jake Bobo did not make the roster, that would be very angry, and that's number 7. Geno Smith loves Jake Bobo. So I don't think he's got anything to worry about this time of year. He's probably still sweating it out because that's the way that he functions, the way that he operates. But nonetheless, really fun story that continues to have new chapters, and I think has a chance to have a bigger portion of the passing game for the Seahawks this year, even with the other weapons they have at receiver. As always, you can follow me on X and Threads at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Connor at John Benintendi on X. Make sure to subscribe to Locked On Seahawks on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. Coming up tomorrow, I'll be rejoined by Rob Rang, and there's a padded practice. We'll have some takeaways coming out of that padded practice at the VMAC, and I'll have my latest interview, Derek Hall, stopping by from the VMAC to discuss his ascent this training camp and what's changed for him after his rookie season. So make sure that you're listening in and enjoy the rest of your Wednesday. Go Hawks.